it, because obviously it's not just you that is impacted. You have this entire ecosystem, and that's really important as you think through dealing with transition.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. What about from the organization's perspective? If I'm a manager in an organization and I know that there's downsizing coming, what are some things I can do to be prepared before I actually have to issue notices or make those decisions?
It's interesting. So we work on both sides. So in our outplacement practice, we have individuals that come to us that are being restructured, and we're working with them. But then we have a number of organizations that we working with them to help deal with transition. So managers are people too.
Right.
And it's never fun. I don't know any manager that we work with that's looking forward to that morning when you've done this, right?
Yeah,
did you enjoy it? Did you?
No.
Oh man, I can't wait till tomorrow morning. I get to talk to that person, right? So I think number one is just you yourself being prepared for that and recognizing that you're not making the decision because it's your journey here. It's just you're running a business, right? So from a manager's perspective, it's really separating themselves from the relationship in one way and say that there's function versus the relationship, right? So I'm responsible because I work for the organization to manage this business unit, and I need to make some decisions. So you have to think about that. You have to think as a manager, how do you prepare the rest of your team for a transition? Because there's a whole survivor impact, right? People that are left behind. How do you get prepared for that? How do you prepare projects so that you're going to be missing somebody of that? So how do you prepare to manage those projects? Because when that person's gone, you're still going to have to do the work, right? Absolutely. So there's lots of multiple elements to this, and even what's your message going to be? How do you? And we coach a lot of managers on how you're going to talk through somebody this. And often what we say is short and sweet.
Right.
And I think Ella talked about this. That a lot of this it's not personal. And 95% of the cases, as in your role and our role, it's not personal. It's just the business is going in different directions. So.
Absolutely. The call-in number for today's show is 613-728-1001. And right now, I think we have Sean on the line.
Hi.
Hi, Sean.
Hi. I have a question. Everyone always tells me there's so many different ways to write my resume, and I was just wondering if there were 3 tips you might recommend.
That's a great question. Alan?
Great question. Well, the first tip is resumes don't get people jobs. That's tip number 1.
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, people get people jobs. I think Sean's questions, obviously we need a resume, but one of the things that I've discovered in the journey with doing this many, many years is people put a lot of time and energy into the resume.
Right.
And in reality, the resume is just a supportive document in the overall campaign. So I would say, our mayor didn't get elected because he had great signs.
Right.
Elected because he had an entire story, which included great science. But so number 1, the resume has a certain function.
Okay.
And what you want to be thinking about is do you have a personal style? So I look at a lot of resumes. Sort of point 2, if you want to look at this, is a lot of resumes. You've read them, I've read them, and they sound just like everyone else. It's funny. My daughter was coming home from France, and they're at the train station, there was a bunch of black cabs. And then there was this one black cab, which was an English black cab. I don't know if you've seen it around.
Yes, I have.
We all know it, right?
Right.
It stands out, right? So what can you do, Sean, to create a voice to your resume that if I meet it, it's going to be Sean. It's going to be somebody that I recognize, and it stands out in its language. So the way you talk about yourself in a resume, does it just sound like one of 300,000 other resumes? And everyone wants to play it safe. And I say, you know what? When you're in job hunting mode and you want the document to be working with you, you can't play it safe. You have to be who you are. The third tip I think about is really grammatically and structurally. Is it cleaned up? They'd be amazed how many times I've seen digits out of place, spaces out of place, grammatical areas. The final kind of bonus tip I'd say, Sean, is I like a lot of white space. Never feel like you have to go to 1 page or 2 pages. I always say resume can be up to maximum 3 pages, but give it lots of space to breathe. And I often find people trying to squish in an entire story in 2 pages or whatever it might be, or 1 page.
Right.
And I always say if it's an interesting read, I'll read 3 pages. If it's not really the size of it that matters. In a sense, it's the quality, right? So giving it lots of white space, look structurally, but remember, it's what you do with the resume that is the most important thing. I've seen a lot of people with very, very mediocre resumes who have done a great job search campaign and ended up in great situations. And I have lots of people spend hours and hours, and every time they apply for another spend hours and hours and hours on the resume because they have a lot of control over it, right?
Right.
It's one of the few things you have control over,
control,
right?
absolutely.
But reality is you got to balance that. So that's a balance of inputs and outputs.
Okay. Well, Sean, I guess simply put, your advice is to find out what makes you so great, highlight it in your resume, and then make sure the standard grammatical, spelling, spacing issues are taken care of. Is that helpful?
Yep.
Great.
Yep. Thank you.
Well, good luck.
Thanks.
Again, the call-in number is 613-728-1001. Alan, you did discuss, making your resume really shine about who you are. How does someone go about doing that?
Well, first you've got to know who you are. It's
Right.
interesting, the Gallup poll of Strength Awareness poll is 1.2 million professionals globally in 60 countries,
Okay.
99 companies. So very large global research on how well people knew their strengths.
Right.
Guess what? 80% of professionals globally didn't have a clear perspective of their unique strengths. It's surprising.
That is
isn't it?
surprising,
You go to them
yeah.
and say, I'm a lawyer, I'm an HR person,
Right.
I'm a finance person, I'm an IT person, I'm a great project manager. Those are all categories.
Right.
Those are all categories. They don't differentiate you. There's, Ella is a great lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
but there's Ella the person, and she has a unique way. She does law, right?
Absolutely.
And there are many, many employment lawyers, but she has a unique brand,
Right.
right? So to me, you got to know who you are, much like Bridgehead knows who it is, and Tim Hortons knows who it is, and
Right.
Starbucks knows who it is. There's a consistency to that. We're all in the business of hot water and cocoa beans, right? But they figured out a very specific nuance of their idea. Number one, we spend a lot of time with clients figuring out what is it that makes you unique. If you are a lawyer or a finance person or IT person, what specifically are you? That?
Right.
And then you start looking at how do you brand that. And I always say, James Cameron figured this out when he figured out this concept of branding. He figured out telling you the story, telling a lot of people about it, and then delivering on the story, which is what he always does in every single movie. It's the
right.
story about the story, then there's a movie, and then there's a follow-up, right? So telling that story, branding that story, and telling it to a lot of people. And that's where Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook and all these incredible tools that are out there. And that's what we talk about, a three-dimensional job search campaign versus this saying a resume. So go back to Sean's point that resume is just a two-dimensional object. I don't know who you are. But when I attach that resume to your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook page maybe,
Right.
or your Twitter account, then I much more around the three-dimensional impact of who you are. You want to be thinking about utilizing all the social media tools, which is obviously discussion, and then probably maybe another story. That'd be another time come back and talk about that, about social media, right? But that's really, so you have to think about all these things that relate to who you are. So knowing you tell that in an interesting way, and you leveraging as many tools you have. The ultimate thing is to be who you are, and it's not to be something you're not. So a lot of people think about branding or marketing. They think, I got to be like that person or be like this person. And really being authentic. That's the ultimate is authenticity.
Great. Well, thanks, Alan. More Alan. We come back working in the capital, and we'll take your questions at 617. And one. your host, Susan Haywood. With me today is Alan Kearns, Canada's career coach. If you have a question for Alan, please call us at 613-728-1001. So Alan, what's some advice on surviving a layoff? If you have a job, been downsized, been laid off for whatever reason, what are some things I can do to survive?
Yeah, so I always say there's surviving and thriving.
Great point.
Right. So, you know, our goal is to not only survive a layoff, but actually thrive. So you actually move from this reality of, oh, and I hope the whole world doesn't fall apart. So actually, it's a really positive transition. We're working through that. And that's a kind of mindset issue, right? Is from that the reality. Listen, when you bring clothing, luxuries like things like that, you know.
Of course.
Luxuries, you know. So there's a reality like that. So you know, one of the things is number one is working with your family. Again, working as a collective unit, right? So when this is everyone's who do you have on your board? So who do you have as friends and family that you can get support from, emotional support, even accountability support, you know, that you do this and, you know, are you getting out? Right? So do you have a support partner? The second thing is, I think, you know, that's why things like this can help. We tend to do when we have a third-party supported mechanism. Place. That's why people have personal trainers. It's why people work with coaches. Different. So having a third-party external support mechanism can really track. You know, if you look at the research around get third-party support, generally they land 30 sooner than their peers. Generally, land in better situations, less stress. Right? It's when you look at research around losing or gaining shape. Statistically, you're 8 times more likely to be a transition when you have professional support.
Okay.
Effectively than you are on your own. And so I would say it's not weakness, it's strength.
Right.
You know, and so another thing is to know what you know and know what you don't know. And I think that's an interesting thing. Also know what you have control over and know what you don't have control over. And I think those are sort of simple. They sound very simple, but if you actually dig a bit deeper on those things, that's important, especially to know what you have control over, know what you don't have control over.
Right.
A lot of people get all upset. They start going backwards. They start saying, "Why did my boss do this?" And why aren't people responding to my emails? Rather than just going, okay, what do I have control over today? I have control over somebody for coffee. I have control over identifying more opportunity.
Absolutely. If you have a question, the call-in number is 613-728-1001. I have an interesting question for you. So explain to me, what would be the difference between doing research on my own on Google and saying, what do I need to do to prepare for a job interview? How do I write a resume? How do I apply and land the perfect job versus going to a career coach like yourself? What's the difference?
Well, I see there's Google is information versus intelligence.
Okay.
Right? So Google has a tremendous amount of information,
Right.
but it doesn't have a lot of intelligence.
Okay.
Intelligence means applying it to your very specific, nuanced situation. funny. I spoke in the University of Saskatchewan Medical School. I spoke to medical physicians who are about to graduate on choosing the right career path once you graduate with the right specialization. And the very first slide I showed was the two founders of Google. And I said, these guys are going to really mess with you in your career and your choices. And come in all the time saying, "Doc, this is what I have. Please write me a prescription.
This is what I need.
This is what I need." Right? To make your life so much simpler, right? And I think it's very dangerous, again, going back to the earlier point and knowing what you know and what you don't know. Know what Google knows about your situation and what it doesn't know about your situation. So I think it's great for meta themes, for ideas, but then to really get the value, how do I apply that? When should I follow up? This is what happened in the meeting. What should I follow up? How should I follow up? This is what happened in the interview. Well, what are your advice about that? And I think a really great career coach will be able to contextualize that relative to the information you're giving them about your very specific situation and move beyond these sort of top 3 ideas or 4 things you should do after an interview or 13 things you shouldn't say during the interview, right? All the things we all know, right? All the numbers, right? The 5 best ways to negotiate, right? To your situation and how to leverage your situation and really, again, I think give you support and advice in a very specific, nuanced way. So.
Okay. Well, we actually have a question from Annie. Annie, are you online?
Yes, hello.
Hello. Welcome to Working in the Capital.
Thank you.
How can we help?
So I was laid off recently, and I received a letter. The letter states that I have $1,000 towards it.
It's like, when's the time you see a lawyer? I always see a lawyer, right?
And you always need to
services. I think something like that you're usually looking at. In our service, what everything you do one-on-one, not just webinar, group-based session. That's sort of one of my bee in the bonnets in our industry. There's a lot of webinar-based, a lot of group-based sessions. And I always say this is a very personal one-on-one situation. You need one-on-one specific support with you, right? So in that kind of situation, we work with somebody in thinking about their strategy, thinking about their strengths, doing some one-on-one coaching sessions, rebuilding the resume. We actually have professional writers on our team that actually customize. So again, versus editing your resume, because everyone will say, well, here's how you write it and we'll edit it. My premise is most people are not writers. And even if they are writers, it's helpful to have a professional. And so if you look at our team, we have 4 people, that's what they do, and and they're journalists, right? That's what their background, they're actually trained as writers, in writing, right? So, and so we're able to take a person's information and really craft a resume as an example. And one of these things about resumes, going back to an earlier caller, is while it's not the most important thing, it's a confidence tool. So if you're confident in that resume, use it more. The key thing. So that's what we can help with somebody's going through their journey, is really taking you from interview coaching, your resume, job search support, and negotiate 5 to 10% of their market value, because they don't really know what their market value is. They're shifting industries or shifting sectors, or they've been a company for a long time, and they tend to be more getting in that kind of place